My name is Travis, I'm 28, and for as long as I can remember my family has treated me like I'm just the extra piece that doesn't quite fit. On the surface, we looked like the ideal suburban picture, but beneath the shiny frame it was all cracks and favoritism. My dad wore his pressed business suits and carried himself like the smartest man in every room. My mom played the peacekeeper role, but the truth is, she always ended up on his side anyway. Then there was my younger sister Rachel. She could burn the house down and my parents would still say she was spirited instead of reckless. Meanwhile, I was the one who worked hard, stayed quiet, and kept trying to prove myself. Yet no matter what I did, I was never enough to be treated like a full member of the family. Christmas was always the stage where this imbalance played out. Rachel got the spotlight, Dad made his speeches about family values, and Mom hustled around, making everything look perfect while ignoring the digs thrown my way. For years, I just endured it. I told myself that maybe one year it would be different. Maybe one year they'd look at me and actually be proud. This year, I thought I'd found my chance. I had a steady job, stable income, and for once, I wanted to contribute something bigger than myself. That's where the chalet came in. I found this beautiful cabin-style lodge in the mountains, with snow-covered peaks, a wood-burning fireplace, and postcard views out the windows. It looked like the kind of place where memories are made. I spent weeks researching, planning, and calculating, until I finally pulled the trigger. $8,000 disappeared from my bank account in a blink. But I didn't even flinch because in my heart, I thought this would be worth it. I thought, maybe this would finally show them I cared. Maybe this year, I wouldn't be just the outsider tagging along. I even sent Dad the reservation confirmation. He didn't say thank you, of course, just replied, "Good. That's the least you could do." I brushed it off. That was Dad, never giving credit, never saying the words I wanted to hear, but never saying no either. Rachel, though, was something else entirely. She immediately started calling it her chalet trip, as if I'd booked it in her honor. She even posted on social media, gushing, "Can't wait for our family Christmas at the chalet Dad rented." My name wasn't even mentioned. When I asked why she wrote it that way, she just laughed. "Relax, Travis. Nobody cares who booked it. It's Dad's idea anyway." That should have been the warning I needed. But I still wanted to believe, still clung to the hope that they'd surprise me with gratitude once we arrived. Instead, the real surprise came on a random Wednesday night in early December. I had stopped by my parents' house to drop off boxes of Christmas decorations I'd bought. They were in the living room, sipping wine as usual. Rachel was sprawled on the couch, talking about outfits she wanted to bring for the trip. I was halfway through telling them I'd stocked up on groceries for the chalet. That's when Dad cut me off. "You're not invited to Christmas this year," he said flatly. The words hit me like ice water. I froze. I thought maybe I misheard. "What?" I asked, searching his face for some sign this was a joke. But there was none. "You heard me," he said calmly, swirling his wine glass. "It's going to be a family-only Christmas. We don't need complications. You can do your own thing." I let out a short, bitter laugh. "Family only? I'm literally your son." Rachel smirked at me from the couch. "Dad just means it'll be less stressful without you. Don't make a scene, Travis." Mom, the eternal peacemaker, gave me her sad, pitying look. "Maybe it's for the best, dear. We want peace this year." The pain in that moment was indescribable. Hurt, betrayal, but most of all, a cold clarity. It was like a curtain finally dropped, and I saw them for what they really were. I had been chasing scraps of validation for years, and in one sentence, Dad made it clear I never really belonged. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just nodded, set the box of decorations on the floor, and said, "Fine." Then I walked out. They probably thought I was sulking, that I'd go home and cry about being left out. But my mind was already spinning. The chalet reservation sat in my inbox, booked under my name, with my money. And as I drove home, their smug faces replaying in my mind, something inside me shifted. They thought they had Christmas all wrapped up, thought they could erase me like I was nothing. They had no idea what was coming. That night, I opened my laptop. I pulled up the bank transfer I'd sent Dad for the holiday fund, and quietly moved it back into my account. $8,000 slid right back where it belonged. Then I opened the chalet booking and canceled the entire thing with a single click. No penalty, just a full refund. It was still early enough in the season. The best part was that the booking was in Dad's name on paper, because I'd wanted him to feel involved. But the payments were mine, which meant when the cancellation went through, the money came back to me. I didn't say a word to them. I just closed the laptop, lay down, and slept with a strange, almost peaceful calm. By morning, the fallout had begun. My phone lit up with 31 missed calls, a dozen voicemails, and one text that made me laugh out loud. It was from Dad, short and clipped. "Call me back. Now." I didn't. I sat with my coffee, scrolling through his voicemails. They were a progression, each one more desperate than the last. First came confusion. Travis, there's some kind of mistake. The chalet reservation isn't showing up on my account. Call them and fix it. Then irritation. This isn't funny. If you're pulling some stunt, you better undo it immediately. And finally, rage. You think this makes you clever? You've embarrassed me, Travis. Fix this. Now. That was the real issue. Not that his son had been excluded. Not that they'd cut me out after I paid for everything. No, the unforgivable sin was that he might look bad in front of his friends and extended family. His pride was the only thing that mattered. By noon, Rachel's texts started rolling in too. And hers were somehow worse. Are you seriously doing this to us? You promised we'd have Christmas at the chalet. All my friends know about it, Travis. I already told everyone. Do you even care what this does to me? I could practically hear her whining through the phone. I didn't reply. That evening, the real games began. Mom showed up at my apartment, casserole in hand, just like she always did when she wanted to sugarcoat bad news. She let herself in with the spare key I didn't even realize she still had. Travis, she said gently, I think we got off on the wrong foot last night. You know your father. He didn't mean it the way it sounded. I looked at her. So now I'm invited? I asked. Her smile faltered, but she pressed on. Of course. But only if you fix the chalet issue. Your father's reputation is on the line. People are expecting this trip. It would mean so much to everyone if you just handled it quietly. The manipulation was so transparent, it almost made me laugh. It wasn't about me being part of the family. It was about me cleaning up their mess. And if I don't? I asked. She sighed, hands folding like she was praying. Then you'll make things very difficult for this family. Do you really want to ruin Christmas for your sister? There it was again. Always Rachel. Always her happiness, her reputation, her spotlight. I remembered birthdays where she got expensive gifts while I got socks. I remembered when she crashed my car, and my parents told me to stop being selfish because Rachel had been stressed. The same pattern was happening again. My sacrifice, her spotlight. But I didn't give Mom the reaction she wanted. I just said, thanks for the casserole, and walked her to the door. She gave me that pitying look one last time. Your father is very disappointed in you. That night, I was added to a new group chat Rachel created. Its title, Christmas at the Chalet Snowflake Christmas Tree. The irony nearly killed me. She must not have realized I'd canceled everything, because the messages were full of gushing about ski outfits, champagne, and Instagram photo plans. Dad chimed in with, I'll handle the wine. Mom sent emojis. Finally, Rachel tagged me. Travis, can you send the updated booking confirmation? Dad wants to make sure the dinner reservations are lined up. I stared at the message for a long time. Every instinct told me to blast the truth right there, to expose them. But something told me to wait. Let them spin their fantasies a little longer. The longer they dangled on the hook, the sweeter it would be when reality finally snapped tight. I didn't reply in the group chat that night. I let the bubbles sit there like a quiet countdown only I could hear. The next morning, more messages rolled in like a slow tide. Rachel posted a mock itinerary with ski times, hot cocoa photos, and a fireplace vibes caption she clearly rehearsed. Dad dropped a single thumbs up and the word confirmed. Mom added a line of snowflake emojis like a stamp of approval. I watched the performance and said nothing. Silence can be a scalpel when you use it with intention. 2 days later, Dad showed up at my door holding a bottle of wine like he'd just remembered how to be cordial. He stood in the hallway smiling, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. Can I come in? He asked, voice smooth and practiced. I stepped aside because curiosity is a strong thing when you've been underestimated. He set the bottle on my counter without asking, like he owned the space. Then he sat forward with his elbows on his knees like we were teammates about to run a play. About the other night, he began. I spoke harshly, and I didn't mean it. He paused just long enough to sound reasonable. Your sister's under a lot of stress, and this trip matters to her, he said, like that should explain everything. You understand how important reputation is. I let the quiet grow between us until it was uncomfortable. He hates silence because it makes him reveal the real script. So here's what we'll do, he continued, as if we were already in agreement. You'll rebook the chalet, use your card, put it under my name so I can manage logistics, and we'll talk about you being more involved in family decisions. The words more involved landed like a coin toss to a dog. I kept my voice steady and asked the only question that mattered. Let me get this straight, I said, looking him in the eye. You told me I wasn't invited, and now you want me to pay again so Rachel doesn't look bad. His smile flickered before snapping back into place. It's not about looking bad, son, it's about family unity. I almost laughed, but I didn't give him the satisfaction. Family unity doesn't require a credit card, I said softly. He leaned back and crossed his arms like a judge in his own courtroom. If you refuse, you're telling everyone you don't care about them, and we won't be there when you need us. There it was again, not love, but leverage. It was the same old ledger dressed up as values. I walked him to the door and thanked him for the wine I wasn't going to open. He tried one last smile that felt like a contract I hadn't signed. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, he murmured. You know how the world works. After he left, I stood in the quiet and felt the calm settle in. Sometimes clarity is just the absence of noise. The very next day, my bank called with a fraud alert. Someone had tried to place a large reservation deposit using my account details with a billing name that wasn't mine. The flag name was my father's. The charge didn't go through because the mismatch tripped the system. I thanked the representative and wrote down the timestamp like it was a piece of a puzzle. Then I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the neutral paint on my wall. I wasn't even angry at first. I felt hollow, like someone had opened a door I already knew was flimsy and walked straight through it. Rachel went into overdrive on social media while the dust settled. She posted a vague story about selfish people ruining everything over a photo of snow. Friends of hers chimed in with sympathetic hearts and comments about keeping your circle small. A cousin texted me privately asking if I had really canceled Christmas out of spite. I didn't defend myself to the internet because the internet wasn't the point. The truth doesn't need a megaphone when you're patient. Nights were the hardest for a while. The city lights outside my window felt like a party I wasn't invited to. I won't lie and pretend I was invincible. There was one night when my thumb hovered over "Call Dad," like it could dial me back into belonging. But then I remembered the bank call. I remembered the spare key Mom used without asking. I remembered the words "family only," like a door closing from the inside. I put my phone face down and chose not to knock. The next morning I opened a new folder on my laptop and named it Truth. I began dropping files into it like bricks into a foundation. There were screenshots of the original chalet confirmation and the cancellation receipt. There were voice messages from Dad, texts from Rachel, and the bank's fraud notice with the time and merchant. I exported Rachel's bragging posts in case they disappeared later. I printed copies of everything and stored them in a binder because paper still matters when people pretend it doesn't. Then I started fixing the small things I could control. I changed every password and removed old devices from my accounts. I called my landlord and asked to replace the lock so the spare key problem went away. He didn't ask questions, just scheduled the locksmith and told me he'd cover half. That simple kindness did more for me than any casserole ever could. It reminded me that care doesn't require control to be real. At work, I poured my attention into the pieces that didn't talk back. I showed up early and stayed focused, not to escape, but to build momentum. Within a few weeks, my manager pulled me aside and told me my numbers were up. Whatever you've changed, he said, keep it up. I did. I kept it up every day because progress is a muscle that grows with repetition. I also reached out to a college friend named Mason who ran a small marketing shop. He needed help on a campaign, and I needed a project that didn't smell like family politics. We clicked back into our old rhythm quickly. The work was clean, the feedback honest, and the invoices paid on time. The extra income didn't fix anything emotional, but it gave me more choices. Choices feel like oxygen when you've lived on someone else's terms. I started going to the gym after work again. The weight room was straightforward in a way people rarely are. You lift steadily and the numbers go up. You stop rushing and your balance improves. Meanwhile, the group chat got quieter. I wasn't feeding it, and without an audience, the performance lost energy. My phone still buzzed with "Are you serious?" texts here and there. I let them pass like weather. Then my aunt, the one relative who noticed things without announcing it, emailed me a PDF. Her subject line said, "Thought you should see this." It was a scan of an email chain between my dad and several relatives. In it, he said Rachel was covering Christmas costs this year, and that I had decided not to contribute due to finances. He even added, "He's embarrassed, so let's not bring it up." I read the line twice because audacity sometimes needs a second glance. My chest tightened and then loosened again. The anger didn't explode this time. It crystallized into certainty. They weren't just cutting me out. They were rewriting the narrative so I would look small even when I wasn't in the room. I emailed my aunt a simple thank you and asked how she was doing. She replied with a sentence that felt like a light in a long hallway. "I'm sorry it's been like this, and I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself," she wrote. "Don't let them make you doubt what you know." That night, I added the email chain to the Truth folder and labeled it Narrative. Then I made a second binder called Timeline and placed everything in order. Seeing it mapped out calmed me. Patterns are easier to challenge when you can point to them with a finger and a date. I also wrote a boundary that I could say out loud without shaking. All communication about money or logistics must be in writing. It wasn't a threat, just a rule that asked for clarity. Clarity is where manipulations go to fade. January crept in with a cold blue light. Decorations came down around the neighborhood, while my apartment stayed quiet and clean. My manager invited me to sit in on a strategy session I'd never been part of before. He said I was steady under pressure, which made me smile in a way I could feel in my shoulders. Mason offered a larger retainer for ongoing work if I wanted it. I said yes because forward is a direction you can learn to love. Slowly, the noise from my family turned into a distant hum. They still posted, still hinted, still tried to cast me as a selfish footnote. But doubt started to drift across their audience. People notice when your story doesn't match your posture. Then my aunt called to say there would be a big anniversary celebration for my grandparents at the end of the month. Everyone will be there, she said, and she didn't have to explain why that mattered. This was my family's favorite stage. They loved a crowd, a microphone, a room where reputation echoed off the ceiling. I didn't plan to make a scene or deliver a speech. I planned to carry the truth like a quiet lantern and hold it up only if someone insisted on darkness. I backed up everything to a drive and to the cloud. I printed a compact packet with dates, amounts, and screenshots that spoke for themselves. I also made a single-page summary with 4 items: the booking, the uninviting, the cancellation, and the fraud attempt. A clean page can be louder than 1,000 excuses. In the meantime, I kept living. I cooked simple meals, read a book that had been on my shelf for too long, and took evening walks when the air felt honest. I called a friend to grab coffee and didn't mention the drama. We talked about plans and laughed at a story from years ago that still had legs. I thought about the kid version of me who wanted their approval like oxygen. I told him we learned to breathe another way. A few days before the anniversary, Rachel posted a throwback of us as kids in matching pajamas. The caption said, "Family is everything." I didn't comment because I don't argue with magnets for attention. I just saved a copy because context is a thing that arrives on time eventually. The morning of the event, I ironed the suit I bought after my last race. It fit better than it did on the day I purchased it, which says something about posture you can't fake. I slipped the packet into my bag without ceremony. Evidence is light when you know you might not need it. Before I left, I stood by the window and looked out at a city that had kept spinning through all of this. The lights didn't ask me to pick a side. I took a deep breath and felt steady from my feet to my jaw. There is a strength that arrives when you stop asking for permission to exist. If no one brought up the story, I would let the night be about my grandparents. If someone decided to perform, I would let the truth speak in 2 or 3 quiet pages. Either way, I knew something I hadn't known last year. I didn't need an invitation to belong to myself. I locked the door behind me and headed to the car. The air was cold, but it felt clean. Whatever happened in that room was not the measure of my worth. It was only a room. And if the past tried to take the microphone again, I finally had a different sound check. I had clarity, I had receipts, and I had no interest in playing along. I drove in silence with the heater low, hands steady on the wheel. Somewhere between the first stoplight and the highway, peace settled in like a passenger who knows the route. The plan was simple and didn't require fireworks. Tell the truth only if asked, and only as much as needed. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't rehearsing what to say. I was practicing how to leave if the performance started up again. Either way, the story was changing in a way you can feel in your spine. It was no longer about whether they would include me. It was about the fact that I no longer needed them to. And that, more than any holiday or chalet, felt like the real beginning. The anniversary dinner was held at a banquet hall downtown. Round tables lined the room with white cloths, candles, and the hum of conversation rising like static. I arrived on time, suit pressed, and packet tucked neatly in my bag. The doorman smiled as he opened the door, and for once I didn't feel like I was sneaking into someone else's party. Inside, cousins waved, aunts hugged, and the warmth of genuine family that didn't revolve around appearances reached me. My grandparents were at the center, radiant in their old-fashioned dignity. My dad spotted me across the room, his jaw tightening. My mom's smile stretched like taffy, brittle and unconvincing. Rachel rolled her eyes the moment I sat down. She was in some sequin dress that shimmered like she'd dressed for a spotlight. Dinner was served, glasses clinked, and for a while it was ordinary. People shared stories, laughed, and leaned into nostalgia. I answered polite questions about work, my apartment, and even a freelance project Mason had roped me into. It felt good to talk about things that were mine, things untouched by their shadow. Then it happened, as it always does when performance meets opportunity. Rachel brought up the chalet. She laughed loudly, dragging her voice across the room. It was such a disaster because Travis bailed last minute. Honestly, Dad and I had to scramble to save Christmas. The words were bait wrapped in glitter. The table went quiet like someone had pulled the plug on the lights. Dad chimed in with a stiff chuckle. We managed fine, of course. But some people just can't handle responsibility. The same script I'd been hearing my entire life replayed like a broken record. But this time, I wasn't sitting there defenseless. I set my glass down gently. That's interesting, Rachel, because from where I sit, the story looks a little different. The silence turned sharp. Cousins leaned in, and even my grandparents looked up from their plates. Dad's voice turned authoritative. Let's not air family drama here. Tonight's about your grandparents. I smiled calmly. I agree, which is why it might be nice for everyone to know the full truth instead of the half-story. I pulled the packet from my bag and slid it onto the table. Evidence speaks louder than emotions when it's stacked in order. The first page showed the chalet booking under my name, my payment, and the confirmation email. Gasps rippled around the table like a wave. The second page showed the cancellation notice with the refund returning to my account. No penalties, no mistakes, just facts. The third page was Rachel's social media posts bragging about her chalet, with captions about Dad renting it. A cousin muttered under his breath, wow. The fourth page was the bank fraud notice, timestamped with Dad's name attached. My aunt's eyes widened as she covered her mouth with her hand. Finally, I placed the email chain Dad had sent to relatives, rewriting the story that Rachel had paid and I had refused. My grandmother's face fell in quiet disbelief. I didn't raise my voice once. I simply said, this is what actually happened. Rachel sputtered, you're twisting things, Travis. But the evidence was already in black and white. Dad stood, face red, voice booming. Let's not blow this out of proportion. It was all a misunderstanding. I met his gaze steadily. A misunderstanding is forgetting to invite someone. This was deliberate, and everyone deserves to know what family values mean to you. The word values hung in the air like a weight. My grandfather coughed and said quietly, that doesn't sound like family to me. Whispers broke out around the table. My uncle shook his head, my aunt whispered to another, and the illusion of their perfect family crumbled in real time. Mom finally whispered, Travis, please stop. But the room wasn't listening to her anymore. The banquet carried on, but the spotlight had shifted. Not onto me, but onto the cracks they could no longer plaster over. I excused myself after dessert, thanked my grandparents, and walked out into the cool night air. The door closed behind me with the sound of freedom instead of exclusion. The fallout was quick and clean. Cousins texted me later that night, some apologizing for believing the old narratives. My aunt called the next day to tell me that Dad had tried to host a damage control dinner, but hardly anyone showed. His grip on the family stage had slipped. Rachel posted vague complaints about toxic siblings, but no one engaged. Screenshots of her original posts about the chalet had already circulated. Mom went quiet, retreating into the shadows of her neutrality. The peacemaker mask no longer worked when no one wanted peace at the expense of truth. Meanwhile, I kept living forward. Work recognized my effort with another promotion, steady and earned. Mason's freelance contracts expanded, and with them, my financial independence grew roots. I moved into a bigger apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows. I stood there some nights, glass of wine in hand, looking at the skyline. This is mine, I whispered, and meant it. Friends re-entered my life where family had once dominated. We grabbed dinners, laughed, and filled the space with something lighter than performance. At the gym, weights rose steadily. Muscles grew where old wounds had once carried heaviness. The text from my parents slowed, then stopped altogether. Their silence was no longer a punishment, it was peace. By spring, my aunt met me for coffee and told me something that stuck. You don't realize it yet, Travis, but you won. Not just against them, but against the hold they had on you. I walked home afterward with the sun warm on my face. For the first time, I believed her. I no longer wanted their seat at the table. I had built my own table, and people who valued me sat there freely. Christmas didn't feel like a wound anymore. It felt like a story I had closed and filed under lessons. And as the months stretched on, I realized the truth was simple. They hadn't uninvited me from family. They had freed me from their cage. The future was mine to write. And that, finally, felt like the real gift.